The Premier League has finally come to an end, and what an interesting season it was. Personally, I thought it was quite enjoyable. Both battles at the top and the bottom of the table that went on until the final day is always exciting, even if your team is involved in the scrap at the bottom. But we survived, so it's all good. So yeah, I'm going to go through my 23-24 Premier League predictions. I'm going to see how well or how badly I did, and we're just going to talk about it. So yeah, at the start of the Premier League season, I do a prediction where I think every side is going to end up come game week 38, and this is the culmination of that. So we're going to go through my original table, starting with who I had finishing 20th and going all the way up to who I had topping the league. So we're going to start off in 20th, and I had Luton Town. They actually finished in 18th, so fair play. And honestly, it looks like I owe a slight apology here to all you Luton fans. Luton actually impressed me this season. They picked up some impressive results. But 6 wins from 38 was never going to be enough to stay up. And that was even with teams around them getting points deducted, which is a bit more embarrassing. They did build a decent squad throughout the season, with Barkley being the standout player who looked to refound his form and his love for the game at Kenilworth Road. He was phenomenal as part of that Luton side, and I think Aston Villa have now signed him, which is mental. He played well. He was the brightest spark of a not so great side, so fair play. I did think it was an interesting signing when it was announced, but hey, it's worked out for Luton. Unfortunately, they didn't stay up, but he proved himself at Kenilworth Road. I do imagine they'll keep most of their signings, which will make for a very strong side in the Championship. Ultimately, I was correct though, as they are going straight back down. It's not the best ending to their fairy tale, but the fact that they made it to the Premier League at all is still impressive. So, you know, hats off to Luton. You gave it a good go, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough for what is a very competitive league. And then we move on to 19th, and I had Sheffield United, who actually finished in 20th. It appears I overestimated the Blades a bit here. It was a very tough season for the Yorkshire outfit, as the lack of business really caught up to them. Not only did they sell and die, but they also let Sander Berge go to a relegation rival, which was a very strange piece of business when it happened, and it's still very strange now at the end of the season, as he was arguably one of Burnley's best players. Hamer was a good signing though, as well as Brereton Diaz in January, but it would have been a Herculean task to save them from the drop at the time they brought him in anyway, so I think he was pretty much signing on for relegation there. But he did well. He scored quite a few goals in the short time he was in Yorkshire, so fair play. The team did not receive the investment it needed when they got promoted. They barely signed any players, and that could be seen in their dismal season, really. They also sacked Heckingbottom in December, but his replacement in Wilder didn't do much better. If anything, they got a bit harder to break down, but again, it was never enough to stay up. To be fair to Sheffield United, they did break a Premier League record. The most goals conceded in a Premier League season. It's a record nonetheless. I'm sure the Swindon Town fans are thanking you for that one. Just a rough season for Blades fans, but hey, you're probably going to walk the Championship next season, so what does it matter? And then in 18th place, I had Everton, who actually finished in 15th. Okay, Everton fans, I owe you an apology. I thought this was finally the season that you'd go down, but quite frankly, you smashed it. You know, you got smacked with 2 points deductions, but in the end, you survived quite comfortably, and to be honest, you would have been challenging much higher up the table if it weren't for those points deductions. But it's like the butterfly effect. Would they've been challenging, would they've won all those games, got the points they did, hadn't the points been deducted? Because that sort of acted like a catalyst for them, in my opinion. So it's hard whether to say they'd be top half if the points weren't deducted, but they, you know, would they perform the same is the real question. But either way, they did well. Dyche got them playing well, despite the minimal business they did in the season. They didn't sign many players because they didn't have the ability to, but they made do with what they have, and they made it work. So, fair enough. They may not have scored many goals, as they only scored more than Sheffield United, but they won the games when it mattered. Shout out to Pickford too, who put in a huge shift to help the club once again, pulling out some amazing saves. He's definitely their most important player by a mile, and he's single-handedly kept Everton in quite a few of their games where they could have lost. So fair play to him. He really is their best player, I think. I think it's fair to say. Like, no one's really going to disagree with me there. Pickford he's just phenomenal. I didn't think Dyche could do it, but he did. And fair play. You know, he put on that tracksuit and they stayed up. So fair enough. Maybe that's the secret, you know, just change up your wardrobe and you'll have a change of fortunes. New drip bounce, anyone? Yep, and then we move on to 17th place, where I had Wolves, who actually finished in 14th. Yep, it's another apology from me, but this time is to Wolves fans. At the time I made this prediction, Lopetegui was considering leaving the club, and as we know, he left. Gary O'Neill came in though, and they performed really well, to be fair. Wolves did get shafted by refereeing decisions this season, which just hasn't helped things for them. It started on their first game of the season against Man United, and carried its way through the entire season. So, you know, as a Forest fan, I do feel for you Wolves. I think you got shafted more than us personally. Yeah, it's tough out there, but you still made it work, and you got important points on the board. They did also lose some important players over the summer and weren't in a position to sign many players, which is why Lopetegui actually left in the first place, but they made it work. The signings they did make were okay. They worked out in the end, but things were also made more difficult by Pedro Neto being injured for quite a while. He is by far and away their best player, and he didn't get to play a lot this season, and Wolves did suffer for it. They've had a really tough season, but they managed to stay up quite comfortably, and that is in part down to Cunha and Hwang, who performed really well and scored many important goals for Wolves, and they ended up surviving quite comfortably, as I mentioned. So it's been probably a tough season for Wolves fans, but you survived in the end, and that's what matters. And then in 16th place, I had West Ham. Yeah, it's looking like I owe another apology. I think I can be forgiven with this prediction though, as when I made it, things were really not looking good for West Ham. I don't know if you remember towards the start of the season, but things behind the scenes were just going to shit, and I thought, you know, this is the one where West Ham finally drop off, but I was mistaken. I think after the predictions video I made went out, they actually started to cook. You know, they made some brilliant signings with the Rice money. You know, James Ward-Prowse and Edson Alvarez were good, but I think Kudus was the standout performer of their new signings, who just played some phenomenal football for the Hammers and is in general just a brilliant player. Now, David Moyes was sacked following a poor run of results, which saw the Hammers miss out on another season of European football, but the work he's done at West Ham over the years has been brilliant. So I think he can hold his head high in that regard. I do think their late summer activity did end up costing them, as I do remember them missing out on quite a few transfer targets originally. But they did bring in some quality who definitely performed well for them. I'm not going to lie, like without Kudus, without Edson Alvarez, without James Ward-Prowse, would they be in the position they are now? Probably not. They might be worse off. But they did still survive and have comfortably established themselves as a mid-table outfit, in my opinion. Now, the loan deal for Calvin Phillips was not great. It didn't work out for the player or the club, so that maybe costed them because, you know, he did get sent off, and when he came on as a substitute, West Ham went on to lose the game 4-3, so there is that. But hey, it was a loan move. He's not going to be there next season. They can all breathe a sigh of relief for that. Interestingly, Lopetegui is taking the job for next season, so it'll be very interesting to see how that goes, but if he's got money available to him, I'm sure he'll be fine. Not the best season for West Ham, but they did way better than I predicted, so you can't really complain. You're still a top half team, so you've got that going for you. Oh boy. And in 15th place, I have Burnley, who actually finished in 19th. Burnley. I think I fell into the same pit a lot of people did. Burnley played some brilliant football in the Championship under Company, and they strengthened their squad well, bringing in players who could play or adapt to the style that Company wanted to play in the Premier League. Now, they tried to play that same style that took the Championship by storm in the Premier League, but it just didn't work out, and they failed to adapt well to the league, and despite some valiant performances, they were relegated once again. And I think I can be forgiven because if you looked at the football they played in the Championship, they were dominating teams. It was some brilliant football. I failed to take into account how difficult the Premier League is. Like, there is a massive skill gap between the Championship and the Premier League. Even the top half of the Championship and the bottom half of the Premier League. Like, massive difference. Fair enough. That's very admirable. But you can't really do that as a newly promoted side in the Premier League. It just doesn't work. And we've saw that in full effect here. It's a cautionary tale for other sides to take into account, but sometimes you've got to adapt your style to stay in the Prem. It might not be the style you want to play, but changes have to be made and sacrifices have to be made if you want to stay in the Premier League, and Burnley just didn't do that. Company just didn't do that. It's on him, really. I think the Clarets would have gone straight back up if Company had stayed, but it looks like he's off to Bayern. Crazy. In hindsight, it was very foolish to say that Burnley would have survived, and quite comfortably at that. That's what good football does to a motherfucker, you know? You think you know that a side's going to tear up the Championship, they're going to ace the Prem, but It was not to be. A cautionary tale. Oh boy. And in 14th place, I had Nottingham Forest. We actually finished in 17th. Hoisted by my own bravado. It was another season flirting with relegation, as Forest barely survived and was subjected to a points deduction as well. It was a less eventful summer for Forest, but they still made some brilliant signings with the likes of Alanga, Callum Hudson-Odoi, and made Wood a permanent signing, just to name a few. Now, this business was done under Cooper, and he was unfortunately sacked partway through the season after a bad run of results. That was despite a strong start. You know, we started the season well. This was finally the one we were going to kick on and really cement ourselves as a mid-table side, but it was not to be. We fell away, and Cooper was sacked. Now, we brought in Nuno Espirito Santo, and he ultimately saved Forest from relegation. Wasn't the appointment I would have made, but he did the job. Fair enough. We had goalkeeper issues throughout the season, and they played those up until the winter window where we signed Matt Sills, who made the number 1 spot his own. And that's not to mention the abysmal refereeing decisions we were on the end of. I'm not going to harp on that. You've heard it more than enough from Forest fans, but it was bad. It was a tough season as Forest fans, but we secured another season of Premier League football, despite the points deduction, despite the abysmal refereeing. I think a lot of Forest fans are happy to see the end of this season. Really wasn't a fun time, but hopefully next season we kick on and have a bit more fun in the Premier League. Fingers crossed at least. Just some nice mid-table mediocrity would suit me fine. And then in 13th place I had Bournemouth, who actually finished in 12th. So actually a fairly spot-on prediction from myself. It was the Cherries' first season under Andoni Iraola, but it proved to be a very smart appointment, and that was backed up by the business they did in both transfer windows. Solanke was an absolute bagsman this season, scoring 19 league goals and benefiting hugely from the attacking football under Iraola. I'm honestly very shocked that he didn't even make the provisional England squad for the Euros. Do I think he'd go? No. But he played some brilliant football, scored many, many goals, and has once again just been ignored by Southgate. I think it's the Bournemouth tax, to be honest, but poor guy, man. He's really playing well. He needs to get a move to a bigger club to be considered for England, I think. Overall, they played well this season and did well to build on the foundations they laid the season prior. The owners invested money in the club and reaped the rewards, really. And they're once again well placed to build on that further next season. Very well played from Bournemouth. You just need a bigger stadium, really. I mean, it's perfect for you, but like, we're in the Premier League, guys, come on. And then 12th place, I had Crystal Palace, who actually finished in 10th. Another close prediction from me. It was another managerial sacking from the Eagles this season, as Roy departed after a not so great run of games, and they also had some issues scoring goals, much like last season. But that all changed when Palace appointed Glasner, as the goals started flowing and results started turning. Palace did lose Zaha in the summer, but that didn't really affect the Eagles too much, as they kept hold of both Eze and Elise. Mateta looked like a new man under Glasner as well, who scored many, many goals since the Austrian's appointment and scored the first Crystal Palace hat-trick since 2015. Palace did have to contend with a lot of injuries throughout the season, which didn't help things, but they ended the season positively and are in a good place to build on that next season. I think it's just simple to say, they cooked. Under Hodgson, they weren't great, but Glasner has really turned things around and they're playing some brilliant football. And honestly, the season probably came to an end too soon for them. I think if they had a lot longer under Glasner, they'd be really pushing that top half. They're top 10, fair enough, but they could have been training for a slight European spot. Who knows? They did well. Eze, Elise, Mateta, phenomenal. And then in 11th place, I had Fulham, who actually finished in 13th. It was another close prediction. I think I'm getting good at this. A yo-yo club no more. Marco Silva has done another wonderful job as he's kept the cartridge up for another successive season. Now, when I made this prediction, it looked like Mitrovic was staying put in West London, and as we now know, that was not the case. Fulham were active in the window though, and the signing of Raul Jimenez looks like it's worked out well, with the Mexicans scoring 7 goals and the likes of Calvin Bassey and Iwobi being solid additions as well. They've set themselves up as a real mid-table outfit, and they're looking to make the middle of the table their own. So far, so good. They also avoid playing Norwich for another season. I just thought it was funny, you know, they've not played Norwich in a very long time, and Norwich failed to get promoted, as Fulham didn't get relegated, so they survive another season not meeting one another. Also, Muniz had a very brilliant month or so for Fulham before dropping off the face of the earth again, so fair play to him, 9 goals, that's good stuff. And then in 10th place, I have Brentford, who actually finished in 16th. Yeah. I had a stinger here, I can't lie, it was not great for Brentford. The Bees were definitely feeling the absence of Ivan Toney, but Mbeumo and Wissa stepped up and scored some vital goals. They even brought back Mope on loan, who scored 6 goals for them. fair enough. But alongside the absence of Tony, the Bees also lost Raya, who they loaned out to Arsenal. Now, they did this on their own volition. They didn't have to do this, but they chose to. So maybe not the best decision from them. But Flecken stepped up and didn't do too bad of a job, to be fair. Brentford have been swamped with injuries this season, which further piled on the misery. Thomas Frank did well with the cards he was dealt though, as they ended up surviving with a 13-point gap above the relegation zone. I don't think they're ever really at risk of getting relegated, to be honest. Like, they were 16th, but they had a large buffer above Forest and Luton and Burnley, so they were fine realistically. Yeah, another season of Premier League football is secured for the Bees. And next season, they'll be hoping for a lot less injuries so they can kick on a bit more. And then in 9th place, I had Brighton, who actually finished in 11th. Back to making close predictions. This time, it's Brighton. Well, close. 2 spots. It's sort of close, I guess. It was a combination of European football and losing some of their important players that was some slide further than I expected. I knew they were going to drop off, but not to this level. João Pedro was a brilliant signing for Brighton as he topped their scoring charts. They also topped their group in Europe, only to be knocked out by Roma in their first knockout match. Playing in Europe definitely affected their performance in the league, and that was further damaged by their woeful injury record this season, as they missed out on vital players like Matoma, Ferguson and Estupiñán, who were all out for large swaths of the season. It was a decent season for Brighton, but a big fall off from the highs of last season, as they were nowhere near as effective. De Zerbi ball wasn't cooking like it was last season. And speaking of the Italian, he also left the club at the end of the season, so I'm not sure who's going to be in charge of Brighton next season. Potter's the name that's been chucked around most, I think, and McKenna from Ipswich. Decent season for Brighton. Obviously, they dropped off, but they did play European football, so it's understandable. But I'm sure they would have liked to do a lot better than 11th place. But all in all, it's decent. They're still around the top half of the league, so you can't really complain with that. I'd love that as a Forest fan, I'm just saying. And then in 8th place, I had Aston Villa, who actually finished in 4th. Look, Villa fans, I do apologise. I was not familiar with your game. Not only did Villa have European football to contend with, but they also did so whilst challenging the top half of the league. And they even spent a couple weeks at 3rd as well, which was the highest league position they attained this season. Villa were cooking under Emery. Moussa Diaby was a brilliant signing, but it was Watkins who lit up the league as he scored 19 goals this season. And he got called up for the England squad, so I don't know what slang he has to do. And that was despite playing European football as well. You know, they were playing in Europe and also flourishing domestically. It's very admirable. A lot of teams couldn't do that, and we saw that this season, so fair play to Villa. Very impressive, and they've been a very strong side on Emery, playing some brilliant football and scoring a lot of goals, which is what you want to see from your team. So yeah, fair play. Champions League football next season, phenomenal achievement. Go get your second star, lads. And then in 7th place, I had Tottenham Hotspur, who actually finished in 5th. It looks like I underestimated you, Spurs, even if it was just slightly. This new look Spurs side started off well under Ange Postecoglou and even found themselves at the top of the league for a few weeks. They couldn't keep up performances though and slowly dropped off. Now, when I made my prediction, it still wasn't clear if Kane would stay in North London. Obviously he didn't in the end, but without him, Spurs performed better than I expected. They were very active in the summer and brought in some real talent. The likes of Maddison, Johnson, Van de Ven and Vicario all established themselves as important players for Spurs this season. They did fail to qualify for the Champions League, but did secure European football for next season as well, even as their form was flagging during those final weeks. It was more of an improvement than I expected, and I can see them building on that next season. They need to keep Ange because he is a brilliant manager. I know he had a bit of beef with Tottenham fans towards those final games, but should be enough to sack him, keep him, get the signings in he wants, and you can build on that 5th place finish and even return to Champions League. But yeah, very, very good season for Spurs in my opinion. Just missing on Champions League is the biggest downer, I think, but you did well. You kept pace with the top 4 for a good majority of the season. I think that's admirable. And then in 6th place, I had Chelsea, who actually finished in 6th. Let's fucking go! I nailed it. My ball knowledge is immense. I saw this season as part of a rebuild for Chelsea with no European football to distract them, and I think I was correct. It wasn't smooth sailing for Chelsea, as they did find themselves mired in the middle of the table for most of the season, but that was not helped by the massive amount of injuries they accrued as well. And getting a lot of players to gel together isn't easy. Pochettino did finally get things rolling though, and guided the club back to the top half of the league and secured European football next season. Then they sacked him. Cole Palmer set the league alight after his move from Man City and carried Chelsea for a lot of the season. I think he was the 2nd or 3rd top goal scorer in the league, which is just insane, because he wasn't pulling up those numbers at City because they didn't play him. It's mad to think he didn't want to leave City, he just wanted to play football on loan. But City were like, you either stay or you leave, and he left. And it's paid dividends for him, so fair play to the lad. As I mentioned, they decided to sack Poch, and I don't really know what they're doing over there, because a lot of the players didn't want him to leave. You saw their posts when he was sacked, like they wanted him to stay, and it's understandable why. You know, a bit of security, a bit of just consistency would have been nice for Chelsea, but Poch was not the one apparently, but he did a brilliant job in my opinion. I don't know why. It was a decent season for Chelsea in my opinion, as they looked to establish themselves around the top half of the league once again. You know, they had a few off seasons, but they had an off season, but they're back in the top half, they're back in Europe. That's a success in my eyes. And then we move on to 5th place, and I had Newcastle United, who actually finished in 7th. It was another close one from me. The main talking point of this season was Newcastle's return to the Champions League, which didn't end too well, and I think it ultimately affected their domestic campaign as well. Eddie Howe has continued to do a good job in the North East, and despite dropping to 7th, they still played well. They were a side racked with injuries and were without one of their most expensive signings in Tonali, as he was banned for his part in the betting scandal, as I'm sure you're all aware. Isak took his performances to another level this season though, as he netted 21 times in the league, and was a real driving force for the Magpies this season, and had Arsenal stiffing around, but the Magpies avoided him at 200 million, so I don't think he's leaving anytime soon. They didn't keep pace with the top 4, as I thought they might have done, but they weren't far off securing European football once again. If only Man City won the FA Cup, they'd be playing in Europe, but it wasn't to be. Injuries really hurt their season, and that could be seen in their performances. They fielded a lot of youngsters, had a lot of youngsters on the bench at some points, while things did sort of fix themselves towards the end of the season. It was a little too late, but I think a 7th place finish isn't too bad for Newcastle. Obviously a big drop off from 4th last season, but gives them a good spot to build on for the next season and challenge for Europe more consistently. So fair play, they would have done it if it wasn't for United winning the FA Cup. And then we move on to 4th place, and I had Liverpool, who actually finished in 3rd. Very, very close prediction from me. I almost nailed it. It was a pretty new look Liverpool side that Klopp took charge of compared to the one last season. And this was revealed to be Klopp's last season. You know, a big end of an era. And it would have been the perfect ending to his time at Liverpool if they had him lift a 2nd Premier League title. But unfortunately, that was not to be. They did spend some time at the top of the league to be fair, but ultimately slipped to 3rd as they just couldn't keep up with Arsenal and Manchester City. Now, they stayed around them, you know, a few points off, but they just couldn't keep up with the sheer momentum those two sides had. So they slipped to 3rd, but they never really fell off until the final games of the season where they just couldn't win the title. McAllister was probably the Reds' best signing of the season, with the midfielder contributing to 10 goals, and especially shout out to Endo as well, who was a brilliant part in their midfield. He wasn't their first choice of defensive midfielder, as they really wanted Lavia, but, you know, he did well, performed well, and was a very solid performer. Just a good player. I like him. That's all I can say. Yes, I mentioned Lavia because when I made this prediction, they were the ones leading the race for his signature. And ultimately, he went to Chelsea, didn't play much, is what it is. I think we also need to mention the massive amount of injuries they were suffering from this season, which makes the top 4 finish just even more impressive because, yeah, they were fielding kids for a lot of their games. You know, cup finals as well. Wasn't easy for Liverpool, but a 3rd place finish, very admirable, but only 1 trophy for Klopp in his farewell season. Then in 3rd place, I had Manchester United, who actually finished in 8th. Okay, maybe I overestimated Manchester United here. My prediction at the start of the season could not have been more wrong. It was a particularly bad season by United standard, with 6th being the highest place they found themselves in this season. I bigged up their signings of Mason Mount, Højlund and Onana. Mount barely played. Onana was not a great keeper, who made plenty of silly mistakes, and Højlund took his time to get going, but he eventually got firing and ended the season with 10 goals, so probably their most successful summer signing. Their European endeavours didn't go well either. I mean, they crashed out of the Champions League group with the likes of Galatasaray and Copenhagen in, so big L, really. It's been a tough season for Ten Hag, with rumours swirling for most of the season about his job being on the line, and I think it's true, to be honest. I think his job is on the line. Did win the FA Cup, so we'll have to see, but I think the new ownership, or the new part ownership, want to get rid of him. Yeah, goodbye bold man. It was United's worst league finish since 89-90, so it's no surprise that Ten Hag's future at the club is not secure. They didn't do well this season. A lot of dismal performances from a side which you'd be expecting to challenge in the top, but they just weren't. I can't believe I had them in 3rd. That is genuinely embarrassing. Fucking hell. 3rd place, you know. Just wasn't a great season for United. They did win the FA Cup, so they have European football next season, but their league campaign was not good. They peaked at 6th, man. They peaked at 6th. I'm finishing 3rd. What's going on? I love a United downfall though, so I'm all here for it. And in 2nd place, I had Arsenal, who finished in 2nd. Nailed it once again. My prediction was pretty much spot on, if I do say so myself. The Gunners spent big in the summer, Most of the signings did well. Havertz, Rice and Raya were all important additions and all contributed to an almost successful campaign. Timber wasn't a great addition, but that's purely down to the fact he was injured in the first game of the season and couldn't play for the rest of it. So it's not really down to him, it's more down to the injury he sustained. Havertz was very impressive though, like he was not doing well at Chelsea. I thought it was a terrible signing when it happened, but it proved out to be a good signing and he's actually played pretty well for Arsenal, so I'll hold hands up. Fair play to Havertz. Arsenal had built a very strong squad and it took City even further than they did the season prior. They took it right to the last day. Ultimately though, they did fall just short once again. Arsenal lost only one game in 2024 and it looks like that was ultimately what cost them. It's the very, very fine margins at the top of the league against Man City, man. Like, you have to be absolutely perfect and they just slipped up. So, yeah, they lost it on the title. But they took it to the final day, which is still very, very impressive. They pushed City even harder, but just could not beat the Citizens. They're a very, very strong side, so I don't think it was very expected of them to win the Premier League, and I know a lot of people didn't want them to win the Premier League, myself included, if I'll be real, but I think it's just their fans are unbearable. Like, realistically, we should want another team to win the Prem to give it more of a competitive feel, but Arsenal fans, man, Jesus Christ. But yeah, once again, a very successful season for Arsenal. Took it to the end once again. They didn't get it over the line again. You could say they bottled it, but I don't think they did this season. They really took it to the end, so fair play, man. Arteta's finally cooking, just can't get over his old boss. It's going to be a very, very tough to dislodge City, but Arsenal look like the best placed side to do it. So fair enough, he had a good season, good signings. Next season might be the one. And I think it's no surprise who I had in first place. It was Man City, who of course won the league. Another prediction I've nailed, but this one's pretty much a free hit at this point. Like, who else is going to win the league? It was an almost perfect prediction from myself once again, but I got one glaring thing wrong. It wasn't a classic City season, as it looked like their dominance was finally waning, but City silenced any doubters by winning an historic fourth consecutive English crown. You know, the history makers, man. A treble last season, the four-peat this season. Fair enough. You can't argue with that. Fair enough. Vardiol was a brilliant piece of business who popped up with 4 goals towards the end of the season, and Doku was also decent as long as he was against someone over the age of 30. Holland didn't exactly kick on as I had expected, only scoring 27 goals this time around, which is still a crazy tally, but not the 40 I predicted. In hindsight, that's a very silly prediction, but he looked like the boy to score 40 goals. I'm not sure what happened, maybe he'd been figured out, but it was quite the far cry from 40 goals. They were taken right to the wire by Arsenal this season, but still managed to come out on top. When those 115 charges hit, it's going to hit like crack, because at least a few of those are going to stick. They should be getting a points deduction in line with other punishment teams have faced, so yeah, it's not looking good for City in the near future. But another brilliant season from the Citizens. Despite only winning 1 trophy, it was still probably the most important one, being the Premier League, so fair enough. And you stopped Arsenal from winning a title, so you've got my support for that. But yeah, those have been my Premier League predictions, or reacting to my Premier League predictions. Overall, didn't do too great. I got a few teams around where they finished, so that's a dub, but there were some glaringly bad predictions like Man United, West Ham and Burnley. So yeah, I've been O2GT. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I will be doing another predictions video come the start of the Premier League, and also reacting to my Championship predictions in the near future. So if you have enjoyed, please do leave a like on this video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.